Alright, welcome to 99% Geek presents a book reading of A Suburban Fantasy, chapter 14.5. And it's called, what is the name again? I don't want to lose my spot, but I want to know the title. Come on. Oh. It is, I Promise I Won't Be Long, is the title name of the chapter. Previously on A Suburban Fantasy, Rachel Lin Smith was just a shy teenage girl until she was turned into a vampire against her will by an evil serial-killing monster named Eckhart Ghens. She managed to escape from his evil clutches and return to the assistance of her friends, who helped her re-acclimate herself with her old life. But he found her anyway and brought chaos, and she eventually met him in a church for one final climactic battle, and won. She defeated him once and for all with the help of her friends, and but he had one last trick up his sleeve, and he's pulled her into some kind of strange nightmarescape world in which he is capable of showing her. He's trapped her inside his mind, and he's showing her a history of his life. And she doesn't seem to be able to get out of it. We've seen his youth, and we've seen him grow up and lose his family and become a shopkeeper, meet a girl, and at his wedding, he was killed and turned into a vampire. And he's very new to being a vampire. He ran away from Spain, and he's now in France, and he's met a woman named Genevieve Labelle, who was the woman that trained Rachel how to fight in her dreams, because Rachel's been seeing visions of Eckhart's old kills, and now she gets to kind of see the other side of, how it all happened. So he's just met Genevieve Labelle on the road. He was attacked by bandits, and she came to his rescue and discovered that he is a vampire, and has now invited her back to her home. He noticed that she was wearing a ring on her finger and asked if her husband would approve, and she responded that he'd turn in his grave. Why? Because her husband is obviously dead. So she's asked him, would you like to be spotted on the main road, surrounded by 5 men's bodies with the blood dripping from your lips, or would you rather come with me? That's like Russian or something, but she's supposed to be French. She made a good case. Genevieve disappeared into the brush, not even waiting for Eckhart's reply. Rachel already knew what he was going to do. He went after her, and the forest quickly gave way to fields of wheat. Genevieve was nowhere to be seen. I could hear her heartbeat pounding in the dark from within the wheat field, but that wasn't all I heard. The hearts of 100 animals, more chickens and pigs and cows and horses, but no human heartbeats, none but Genevieve. Do you manage all this farmland on yourself? Eckhart asked the woman, speaking loudly to be heard over the wheat field. Genevieve must have stopped because Eckhart collided with her suddenly. He reached out and steadied her, but she was completely unfazed. It's something to do, she said quietly, answering his question. It's a lot to do, Eckhart remarked, speaking from experience. And do you do the harvest alone as well? I've totally lost that voice as well. I've lost all the voices. It's horrible. I eat whenever I want to, the woman explained, leading Eckhart through the field. Feed the rest to my animals. Eckhart's jaw dropped. What about money? He asked. Genevieve stopped again. Her gaze didn't seem so willing to meet his anymore. My husband was in the army, she explained. I get a tidy sum every month because of the sacrifice he made. All I can do is try to earn it by honoring his memories and protecting the things that mattered to him. Eckhart looked away himself. I just saw someone close to me, he admitted to the Frenchwoman. I don't think I honored her much at all. Genevieve caught Eckhart's eye again. Did you kill her? No, Eckhart insisted. I swear. She let me inside and we talked. Oh, sorry. She let me inside and we talked. I told her everything that had happened to me since my wedding. She listened to it all, without a sign of worry, without even needing to fight back a yawn. And when the sun rose, she followed me to a guest room where I could sleep. She, however, did not. When I woke up at sundown that night, I could hear that she wasn't home yet. In fact, it wasn't until an hour later that I heard her steady, confident strides down the dirt path to her house. Eckhart, quick to meet the new woman in his life, intercepted her as she came through the front door. Her dark hair was frizzled under her worn army hat, and it was clear she hadn't slept or even bathed. If she was surprised to see him waiting for her, she didn't show it. Without even a pause, she asked, "Have you eaten?" It was a strange greeting. Oh, it was a strange greeting. "I thought I'd wait for you," Eckhart told Genevieve. "Where were you?" "The library," she said. "There's only 8 or so miles from here." There's one only 8 or so miles from here, sorry. Eckhart grabbed her arm, and his voice had a sudden edge to it. "Did you tell anyone?" he asked her. "No," she said, pulling her arm away. "I was just doing some research. No one even caught a glimpse of what I found." She pushed past him and dumped her knapsack on her kitchen table. Her hat landed beside it. Genevieve's house was beautiful, larger than Rachel's. It was cluttered with all sorts of paraphernalia that suggested Genevieve had done a lot of growing up in the past couple of years. Everything was unusually clean, except for the filthy military jacket and rifle hanging from the far wall of the living room. "What did you find?" Eckhart asked Genevieve, with a none too subtle change of topic as he picked up her hat absent-mindedly. I feel like his voice has become the Kingpin from Daredevil. I'm just gonna go with it. Have you heard of a man named John William Polidori?" Genevieve asked, taking her hat back angrily. "This was my husband's," she added sharply, her look a warning to Eckhart. "Who is John William Polidori?" Eckhart asked, his eyes meeting hers. Genevieve pulled a large leather-bound book from her knapsack and laid it square on the table. No one until like 40 years ago, when he wrote a book based on the local legends and myths from a remote area of Romania. Legends of creatures that look like men, but are imprisoned in darkness and surviving off human blood. Eckhart's finger tapped impatiently on Genevieve's kitchen table. "What did he call these creatures?" "Vampires," the dark woman said, looking like a different person without her hat. Her nose jutted out noticeably from her pale face, and her black hair fell in strands. "That's with a Y." "I can't believe this," Eckhart said, looking down on the book in front of him. "You spent all day doing research for me?" "Oui," Genevieve replied. "Oh, sorry, that's yes in French." "I knew that," Rachel said in complaint. "I'm Canadian." "Thank you," Eckhart said to the French lady that took him in. "I don't know what to say. Is there a cure?" "I don't know," Genevieve told him, "but Polidori depicted them as having endless potential for evil." Eckhart seemed to freeze, his eyes meeting hers. "I'm not evil," he told her. "I think it will be best," Genevieve said slowly, "for both you and me, if you feed." Suddenly they were in the barn. It was large and smelled like shit. She had 2 pens for her pigs with a gate leading to a larger outdoor pen. She also had at least 7 horses that Rachel could count, and even more cows than that. Genevieve handed Eckhart an axe, and he held it awkwardly. She stepped into one of the pig pens and pulled an older-looking female pig from the other swine. "She doesn't have too many seasons left," Genevieve told Eckhart, struggling to keep the pig steady at Eckhart's feet. "All I ask is you make it quick," she said. "1 blow to the head." Eckhart looked down at the pig, but didn't move, the rusted axe still in his hands. I was hungry, and the pig's heart beat loudly, almost as loud as Genevieve's, but all I could remember was her face. Only the night before, the horror at seeing me embrace the monster, and without the instincts of the beast, well, Eckhart couldn't kill the pig. And Genevieve rolled her eyes in frustration as she took the axe from his grasp. I never was much of a farmer. I wasn't tough or handy. I wasn't my sister. Eckhart did his best to hold the pig steady, and Genevieve buried her axe into the top of its skull. The pig squealed and spasmed, but Eckhart let go. I smelled the blood, and that was it. Eckhart moved straight for the pig's neck and bit deep into its flesh. Seeing him go, Genevieve stepped back suddenly, almost in a jerk reaction. Eckhart drank deeply until the animal was no longer twitching, and finally he let go and stood up. Thank you, Eckhart said quietly, wiping the blood from his mouth as his gaze read hers. I'm sorry, he added, and it really did sound like he meant it. I didn't know which I wanted to say more, so I said both. Oh, the thank you and the I'm sorry. Rachel knew the torture Genevieve was going through. She felt it too. Rachel knew the monster Eckhart would become, and yet she was seeing this totally different person and couldn't believe it could go so wrong. I don't think you're evil, Genevieve said, her eyes wide with emotion and at least a tear or two. I think you need guidance. She pulled the axe from the pig's head and proceeded to wipe the blade clean. My husband used to teach me martial arts, she told Eckhart. I think it would help you. You want to teach me how to fight? The vampire asked, no longer a monster, but pretending to be a man once more. I want to teach you confidence, Genevieve said. Help you find your center. She chuckled a little, laughing at a funny thought. Don't take this the wrong way, but you might be the most pathetic monster the world has ever seen. You need to be taught discipline for yourself, or you'll go the way of all weak men with power. So I can stay here? Eckhart asked. Genevieve nodded. As long as you don't harm other human soul the entire time you live with me, she said. Not for food, not for any reason, and especially not me. She raised an eyebrow and added, Oh voy a matarte. What was that, Spanish or French? Rachel really wished Eckhart would keep his translation going, because when it didn't work, things got confusing. I stayed with her months, and she taught me things Mr. Tracy never could. She taught me languages, both French and English, culture, geography. We would start every morning with a strict exercise regime. Strict for her perhaps, but easy, of course, for a vampire. Still, the quiet time gave me a chance to test my limits and get comfortable in my own skin, get comfortable with being a vampire. Rachel was in the grass outside Genevieve's house then, with Eckhart and Genevieve facing one another in positions Rachel remembered well from when Genevieve was training her. The sky was clear and the moon was bright. You're not serious, Eckhart said to Genevieve, a smirk growing on his face. He was no longer wearing the dirty tuxedo from his marriage day, instead dressed in clothes Rachel only assumed were her husband's, and Genevieve was handing him a sword. You would trust me with a sword, Eckhart continued, hesitant to take the offered blade. If I didn't trust you, I wouldn't have offered you a place to stay. Genevieve seemed aware that Eckhart could kill her quite easily even without a sword. Then why do I need a weapon? Eckhart asked. Genevieve smirked and explained. So that I may come at you with my sword and show you brute strength isn't worth half as much as technique. I'm going to spar against you and win. Eckhart chuckled and took the blade from Genevieve's grasp. Those sound a lot like fighting words to me, he said, looking the blade over before holding it out at the ready. It wasn't the same sword he'd seen her fighting with. This one was plain, with a worn leather handle and inconsistent blade. It looked homemade. So, is this a good stance? Eckhart asked, pointing the blade to the sky with both hands held tightly over one another. It was not a good stance. Genevieve just smiled. That would be telling, she said, in a strangely Russian accent, even though she's French. Eckhart was no longer smiling. In fact, he frowned. Wait, he said quickly, trying to stop her. You mean you're not going to teach me any... Suddenly her sword, or more accurately her husband's, was free of its scabbard and ringing against Eckhart's blade with such speed and ferocity that Eckhart stumbled back in surprise and fell to the ground. I surrender, he said, but she just chuckled. Rachel was starting to guess where he got that annoying chuckle from. You can't surrender, Genevieve told Eckhart. We're not nearly done yet. She put the point of her sword against his neck, forcing him to his feet. With a lazy swing, Eckhart knocked Genevieve's blade away with his own, and just like that, the fight was back on. As with before, she just went at him with over-the-top zeal, and Eckhart was completely overwhelmed. Surrendering didn't work, but it seemed he had a new plan. It was actually a classic of his. Eckhart tried to run. He didn't get far, with Genevieve easily keeping up. She just kept pushing him backwards, and he couldn't even watch where he was going, all focused on warding off her attacks with his sword. His foot hit an unsteady rock in the ground, and he almost fell again. Genevieve took advantage of his momentary weakness, and sliced her sword across the calf of his leg. The cut wasn't deep, but he dropped to his knees and screamed anyway. The French warrior woman leaned over him, breathing heavily with excitement. She was enjoying this. It's so rare I get to go full out, she said, the two of them looking down at his cut. I hope you don't mind. The wound had already started healing. Suppose not, Eckhart said shakily. He jabbed his sword out at her, and she easily disarmed him, sending his weapon to land many feet away. Go fetch, she said, or are you going to let people push you around forever? Is this how your husband trained you? Eckhart asked, his face a mess of emotion. He got up and jogged quickly to his sword. Genevieve didn't answer his question. Eckhart grabbed his sword but didn't turn back to face Genevieve. Instead, he broke out into a sprint for the wheat fields. It wasn't a surprise, but he was much closer than she was. By the time she reached the crop line, he'd already lost himself in her vegetation. Genevieve chuckled again. And Rachel had to admit her chuckle was far cuter than Eckhart's. No, that's gross. That's still gross. Anyway, you've entered my domain now, Mr. Ghens. She stepped into the corn and subsequently disappeared herself. Now I feel like my accent has become from what was that movie? Was it Russia with Love with the German woman who worked for um Spectre? Anyway, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Genevieve chuckled again. And Rachel had to admit her chuckle. Oh, I already read that. And I already read that. You've entered my domain now, Mr. Gans. She stepped into the corn and subsequently disappeared herself. Rachel found Eckhart easily, and he seemed to just be biding his time. I've found your tracks, Genevieve's voice called out from somewhere else in the field. I know exactly where you are, she said. I have a distinct advantage over you. Eckhart set off suddenly to his left, pushing through the long stalks in search for his mentor. I'm throwing my voice, she said with what sounded like a little pride. There's no point trying to follow it. Perhaps, Eckhart said, colliding with Genevieve and giving her a mighty bear hug. But I can hear your heartbeat from a mile away. That's amazing, Genevieve said, turning her head so her face was mere inches from Eckhart's. Was a mere inch from Eckhart's, even closer than inches. The vampire let go and backed away. It's not, he rambled, shaking his head. It's monstrous. Water break, do, water break. Delicious. You know what? Carrot break, too. Carrot break, do. Sorry I'm eating while I'm doing this, but in my defense, I'm working 2 hours. I work the night shift at 7 o'clock. It's not 7 o'clock anymore. It is 7:53. Alright, we should keep reading. What there's carrot in my mouth. And that was the first vegetable I've eaten in months. Alright. So, she thinks his hearing is amazing. He says it's not, but he says it's monstrous, but she says, no, Genevieve said. I'm a monster, he told the French woman. You should never forget it. Every time I look at you, I can't help myself wondering what you taste like. What I taste like? I wonder if you know where this is headed. Genevieve asked coyly, an eyebrow rising. What happened next took me by surprise. Genevieve swept him in and kissed Eckhart passionately. Rachel was pretty sure she saw more than a little tongue, and the woman's kiss lingered on his lips before pulling back. So, what do I taste like? She asked with a confident grin, searching Eckhart's bewildered face. Your husband, he said slowly. Genevieve's face was priceless. Excuse me? What would he think? Eckhart asked, genuinely concerned. She sighed slowly and said, I'll always wear his ring and be his wife. But we had an agreement. She grabbed his hand and threw him a smirk. I'm an independent woman capable of sleeping with whoever I wish. Genevieve kissed him again, apparently having much enjoyed it last time, and she brought him to the ground. He didn't even try to struggle. Her sudden interest in me was more than a little jarring, to say the least. I couldn't believe anyone would want to kiss me with what I was. Rachel knew the truth. Genevieve had probably wanted to sleep with Eckhart for a long time now. Attraction was funny like that. Now Genevieve was stripping his clothes. Rachel looked away. She didn't need to see that. From behind her, she heard a familiar chuckle and tried to cover her non-existent ears with her non-existent hands. It didn't work. The months passed, and I came to realize I was as much there for Genevieve as she was for me. She continued to train me, and I continued to provide her with friendship. Eckhart and Genevieve were in her field, sparring once more. Genevieve hit him with a leg sweep, and just like that he was on the ground. Maybe tomorrow, Genevieve said, offering Eckhart a hand. It was suddenly tomorrow, and again Eckhart was knocked on his ass. Then the next day, and the next. One day Genevieve moved so fast Rachel couldn't even comprehend what happened. The result was the same. I'd say maybe tomorrow, Genevieve said with a look more serious than usual, but I don't really think you're trying anymore. I'm trying, Eckhart insisted. That wasn't entirely true. Would you still be on your ass if this was life or death? Genevieve asked, jabbing her sword at his chest. Sorry, there was a water break there. Do, water break. Eckhart suddenly disappeared from the floor and reappeared behind Genevieve. Her eyes widened in shock, almost as large as Eckhart's. How'd you do that? Genevieve asked when she seemed to find her breath. I'm not sure, Eckhart admitted. I'd only done it once, or perhaps twice before, and never with any intention. Genevieve shook her head. No living thing can move that fast, she said with certainty. Eckhart chuckled, the classic chuckle Rachel just loved to hate. Maybe I'm not living, he suggested lightly. Too lightly, it seemed, for Genevieve. "Don't talk like that," she said, shrugging from his grasp.
"Are you okay, Genie?"
Eckhart said with a frown.
"You're being somber, Genevieve, today."
"It's nothing," Genevieve insisted, clearly not going to say anything, until she finally convinced herself to. "I've been starting to think it's not going to work out between us." Eckhart paused.
"What, like just now?"
"Not just," Genevieve said with frustration. It seemed like there was something she was trying to get off her chest. "We're running out of livestock," she told him, at last.
"What?"
"Do you have to eat, like, every day?" she asked, carrying on. "Perhaps you could eat every other day, or eat something else."
"I can't eat anything else,"
Eckhart insisted to her.
"And the longer I go between meals, the more I feel my control just slip away. I'm scared if I'm not careful the monster could take over completely, and I'd be gone in an instant. Reality was it didn't happen nearly that fast."
"You're telling me," Rachel remarked, already feeling like his tale had gone on forever. "Well, at the speed you're consuming," Genevieve said, "we'll be out of food in a month."
"We?"
Eckhart repeated. There was more. "An animal has been getting into the wheat fields," Genevieve continued. "Normally that would just mean a more heavy winter, but—" She paused. "It seems we're both starved before next spring."
I was shocked. Had I really doomed her? "What kind of animal would go after your wheat?"
Eckhart asked, still not quite on the same page.
"A wolf?"
Genevieve gave Eckhart a look that was almost pitying. "I don't know if you know this," she said, "but wolves are carnivores. It probably wasn't them. Bears, maybe."
"What is it? What it is?"
Eckhart said, chuckling suddenly.
"We'll eat them. Two problems solved."
It was a little uncanny, but Eckhart seemed to be ever so slowly turning into the evil son of a bitch that she remembered.
"I didn't eat that night. Out of guilt, I suppose. Nor the night next. By the third night I knew I'd waited too long, but couldn't bring myself to eat any more of her animals. I decided instead to go hunting in her forest. It turned out that Genevieve had a similar idea, and she was laying about traps she'd been working on in her barn. I avoided her. She hadn't really wanted to talk to me since that fight, and I had the distinct impression she wasn't much keen to start. Also, I wasn't sure I trusted myself anywhere near her."
Rachel watched Eckhart find an empty clearing, and standing still, he took a deep whiff of the air.
"I could smell the wildlife around me, and just like that the animal took over. I didn't even bother trying to distinguish any of the smells. I just chose one and pounced. But then there was a scream."
Completely on cue, a shrill scream roared out through the trees, and like that, Eckhart was gone. In a moment he was standing above Genevieve, looking down on her as she struggled to free her leg from a bear trap. There was a lot of blood. "Merde," Genevieve said in French, a word Rachel remembered was a curse. "Elle est cassée. Aidez-moi à descendre, Eckhart, s'il vous plaît." "Come on, Eckhart. Where was your translation?" That was very well acted.
How it had happened, I didn't know. But I didn't help her. As soon as I was aware of the blood, and that had been for a while, her words were nothing to me. Her heartbeat spoke louder than her mouth, and suddenly I was upon her and tearing at her neck.
Genevieve tried to push him away, but her efforts were futile. She tried to pull her sword from her belt, but he pinned down her arms and continued to drink heavily.
By the time I could stop myself, it was too late. I'd already drunk deep, and deep. I'd already drunk deeply from her, and it was obvious her life was slipping away.
Very obvious indeed. Her skin was almost translucent, and her eyes were rolling into the back of her skull. If there was a light, Rachel was sure Genevieve was seeing it.
Jeannie!
Eckhart said frantically, holding her in his hands. In an instant, that it's supposed to be instant, but I did not write it as such. In an instant, they were both gone, and suddenly Rachel was in the barn. Eckhart slipped into the center and slowly laid the dying woman upon the hay. Eckhart had been a messy eater, and his white shirt was damp with Genevieve's blood.
Don't die on me,
he begged her. I know where this is going, Rachel said.
I couldn't lose her like I lost my wife. Worse, it would be more my fault than ever.
Oh? Rachel said sarcastically. You think?
I was having flashbacks of my wedding night, of the blood and the brutality, of Queen Isabella and her blood. I did the only sensible thing.
Eckhart bit his own wrist, and pressed it aggressively to Genevieve's mouth, forcing her to drink from him. She drank, and swallowed and drank, and slowly seemed to get better. Her eyes stopped rolling, her body stopped twitching, she seemed to be sleeping, and Eckhart fell back against the gate of one of the vacant horse pens. All the horse pens were vacant. There didn't seem to be many pigs left either. Water break, do-do-do-do-do. I want a carrot. But that last carrot took me like a year to chew and swallow, so I think I might just keep reading. We have a little over 30 pages left, and we have an hour and a bit, an hour and 40 minutes to do it. We'll make it. I believe. I believe that Eckhart's turning into an evil vampire. I believe that he just turned Genevieve too. That song was not in the book.
She slept for hours, and I sat at her side without once even considering getting up. Finally her eyes opened, and the horror was allowed to continue.
Genevieve bolted up, grasping her chest and gasping for breath. Scrambling to his feet, Eckhart rushed to help Genevieve up, but she would have none of it. Slapping his hand away, she struggled to her feet and pushed Eckhart away. "What did you do to me?" the French vampire yelled, trembling with rage. "What did you do?"
I'm...
Eckhart stuttered.
I'm sorry.
"Oh?" Genevieve said, her expression softening. "I forgive you."
Really?
Eckhart asked hopefully. "No!" Genevieve screamed, her fangs extending. She roared, "Roar!" Her face twisted in rage as she stepped towards him. "Step!" She didn't say that.
I don't know exactly what I was expecting anymore, but this wasn't it.
Eckhart raised his hands defensively, automatically taking a stance. "What?" Rachel didn't really blame him, but Genevieve just stopped and chuckled. "Oh, really?" she said, her voice low and scary as hell. "You think so?" Without warning, she became a flurry of motion. Charging him, her fists came in fast and hard. Eckhart tried to block her fists with his arm, but she just grabbed one, wrapping her arms around it and twisting until it snapped. Eckhart screamed, but Genevieve wasn't done yet. She spun around him, slashing at his back and leaving deep gashes with her scary vampire claws. Why didn't Rachel get scary vampire claws?
Hold on a second.
Eckhart said, stumbling away from her. There was no respite. As Genevieve came in again, Eckhart again raised his arms in defense, his broken arm already healing. Her fists pounded loudly against him, making cracks with each hit. But this time, Eckhart managed to get an elbow through her defenses, getting her in the gut.
We can talk this out,
Eckhart pleaded, the two of them a tangle of punches and kicks. Genevieve just answered with her fist to his jaw. Eckhart tried to put a little distance between them, but Genevieve wouldn't let him go so quick. Grabbing his shirt, she threw him through one of the wooden support beams holding the ceiling up. The upper scaffolding began to collapse, raining debris around them.
Just try to look on the bright side,
Eckhart said, a large wooden block only barely missing his head. He raised his arms to try and ward her back, though it was really quite futile.
At least now we can be together forever.
Genevieve roared again. Behind her, a piece of debris from the ceiling knocked over a lantern, lighting some of the hay aflame. Grabbing Eckhart, she threw him straight up through the ceiling. Outside, Eckhart broke through the wood and flopped painfully down the side of the roof, where he slid off and dropped at least 3 stories to land on the hard ground just beside a large soft bush. That was not a run-on sentence at all. That whole paragraph was one sentence. Wonderful. Rachel could hear the most inhumane noises. I'm not fixing that. Rachel could hear the most inhumane noises coming from the barn, and she was pretty sure only some of them were Genevieve. Even as an evil vampire, Genevieve is badass, Rachel said, having to give the girl credit. Rachel stayed there with Eckhart for a while and just watched the barn cave in on itself, the fire engulfing everything. Finally, when it seemed Genevieve must have died within, she pushed aside the barn door and joined Eckhart outside, not even looking back. "We can't stay here," Genevieve said. She was naked, covered in mud and animal blood from head to toe. "Be ready to leave by sundown." Sure enough, the sun was beginning to peek its way over the horizon. Not it is way. No apostrophe. Alright. Eckhart followed her after her.
"Where are we going?"
he asked. "I'm thinking Paris," she said, almost sounding chipper. Was it just an act? She continued, "They say the rats outnumber people 10 to 1.
"That's fascinating,"
Eckhart said, though he didn't seem to think so. He changed the subject.
"Are you still mad at me?"
Genevieve didn't look back as she entered the house. Carrot break, do. Don't worry, it's a very tiny carrot. It's like a little pink carrot pinky. Carrot break, do. Maybe water too. Do. I'm eating and drinking on a podcast. This is the best podcast ever. I grade these carrots a 7.5%. And that was Food Ratings, presented by 99% Geek. Now back to a book reading, presented by 99% Geek. Alright.
I was ready by the next evening, but there was one more thing I still needed to do.
Rachel found herself at Genevieve's husband's grave, but there was another grave now, marked with a simple stone. Etched into the stone was just a name. Felicia. Genevieve joined him in the clearing, a pack resting on her shoulders. She seemed grim and determined to leave. She wasn't much surprised to find her sire there, and ignored him at first to pay her final respects to her husband. Once she was done, Eckhart spoke.
"It just didn't seem right that you didn't have a mark somewhere,"
Eckhart explained, the second grave to Genevieve, though really no explanation was necessary. "Did you bury anything of hers?" Genevieve asked without looking at her sire.
"Just my wedding ring. Just my wedding ring,"
Eckhart said, raising his hand to show he buried not only the ring, but the finger it came on. Gross.
"Maybe they'll both meet somewhere in heaven,"
he suggested to Genevieve, looking down on her husband's grave. Genevieve's mouth curved ever so slightly into a smile. "That's a nice thought," she said. The smile faded almost as fast as it appeared. "I'll never know, though, will I?" You've damned me." She turned away, but before setting off she added, "Maybe one day he can forgive you for what you did to me, but I never will."
Ah. I can't remember how long it took us to get to Paris. When you're a vampire, it becomes rather easy to lose track of time. All I know is Genevieve was no longer interested in continuing my training, or playing around, or even talking to me beyond giving orders. We would hunt once or twice a night, feeding on small animals like rabbits and squirrels. It was a far better diet than what awaited us in the city. Genevieve had saved up a large sum of money, and when we got to Paris, she was able to rent a small 2-bedroom apartment with enough to pay the rent for years. She had rules there, ones that I dared not break. We were to eat only rats, and maybe cats, but never humans. Anything but humans. That was enough for Genevieve. She made it her mission to make friends and get a job, but I had a harder time blending in. The woman who was once my mentor and bedfellow was quickly making it abundantly clear she wanted a life separate from me. Most days I'd see her only at sundown and sunrise. And for feeding, of course. Finally, one day, things reached a breaking point.
Rachel found herself in a dark Paris alley. Eckhart and Genevieve were both chowing down on some rats. Good. The French vampire still in her nightgown. Eckhart coughed and dropped his rat. Reaching into his mouth, he pulled out something and spit it on the ground.
"Another hair," he complained.
Genevieve rolled her eyes. "Maybe you're doing it wrong," she suggested without interest.
"Or maybe I just don't like rat,"
Eckhart told her. "Then leave," Genevieve said angrily. "All you're doing is holding me back. Unlike you, I'm really trying here," she insisted. She dropped her rat too now, and was advancing on Eckhart. They were both so distracted, neither noticed the 3 loudmouths enter the other end of the alley. "Ha ha 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 ha. Guess nobody told you this is our alley," one of the men said, noticing the 2 vampires. He seemed to sway as he spoke, and Rachel didn't want to even guess how many drinks he'd already had tonight. Eckhart frowned.
"We were here first,"
he said. It was lucky the men hadn't caught him feeding. Rachel imagined that would be harder to explain. This is someone else. "Ah-ha-ha! Hey! Look at this one!" the second man said, his eyes undressing Genevieve where she stood. "She looks real pretty in her jammies." The third man laughed. "Ah-ha-ha! Bet she'd look even better without 'em." "I'd leave us alone if I were you," Genevieve warned them, but they completely ignored her. The first guy closed the distance between himself and Eckhart, with the third man along for backup. The second man was much more interested in Genevieve and began circling her slowly. I know we're scary, so I'll try to make this simple for you," the first man said in a rational tone. "Give us everything you have, and we won't try to kill you, then take it all from your corpse." He eyed his friend Genevieve and added, "Either way, though, we're still taking turns with your missus here. That part is non-negotiable." His buddy slapped Genevieve on her ass, and it was a move he would very much regret for the rest of his tragically short life. The female vampire went from 0 to 100 in a split second, lunging atop the man and ripping his throat clean off with her jaws. The man fell, gurgling disturbingly in his sad attempt at a scream as Genevieve happily doused herself in the blood madly gushing from his neck. The other 2 men were in shock, and Eckhart just shrugged at them before throwing out his fist and catching them both in the face. Eckhart followed that up with a punch to the first man's gut, doubling him over, and giving Eckhart time to use his other hand and crush the third man's head into the nearest wall. It collided with a crunch, and the man was quite suddenly dead. Eckhart threw the first person to the floor and pinned him there.
You don't know the first thing about scary, he said to the man, growling and baring his fangs. Urgh.
The man was screaming loudly now for help, but no one came.
Maybe I'll give you a tour,
Eckhart continued, jabbing his hand onto the man's chest. Apostrophe S. I'll put apostrophes on like every single it. Alright, into the man's chest. The vampire reached around inside and then started,
Maybe I'll give you a tour,
Eckhart continued, jabbing his hand into the man's chest. That deserved more emphasis.
Urgh.
The vampire reached around inside and then started to pull.
Let's start with your intestines.
The screams that followed seemed to ring in Rachel's ears long after the scene changed. The two of them were back at Genevieve's apartment, neither one speaking as they both sat unmoving on a large couch. The two were still covered in the viscera of their night's activities. Genevieve looked at Eckhart, or, Rachel supposed, what he was wearing, and then down at the blood and guts stained on her own clothes. She looked like she wanted to say something, but couldn't bring the words out. Finally, Eckhart couldn't take the silence any more.
Don't you dare waste a moment of guilt on those assholes, he said, anger in his voice. They would have killed us, raped you, maybe raped me for good measure, and who knows what else.
I know, Genevieve said quietly.
You would have killed them, even if you were human,
Eckhart tried to reason. Maybe. Genevieve looked pale, well, more pale than usual for a vampire.
It wasn't necessarily the killing that bothered her. I knew because I felt the same way. She'd enjoyed it a little. Too much.
A lot too much.
People are allowed to walk the streets, free to terrify and hurt,
Eckhart continued, still trying to justify their actions.
We made the streets a little safer tonight,
he told her.
No one is going to complain.
I suppose, Genevieve said, not nearly as convinced. Eckhart, however, took it to the next level.
We should do this every night,
he suggested, and her eyes shot to him like mosquitoes to a flame.
Hear me out, he said, trying to explain. Eating rats has been like a service to the town. After all, they're nothing but pests, a never-ending nuisance. And the only thing more abundant in this country than rats is corruption. That's a fact.
Not a fact, Genevieve said, shaking her head. Pretty sure you can't quantify corruption. Eckhart wasn't about to take logic for an answer.
We can feed off the bad people and make the world better, while simultaneously quenching our thirst, he outlined, adding after, right?
Genevieve didn't say anything, but looked back at him with such ferocity that it was like she was afraid to answer. Was she afraid the answer was yes?
And so, the rules changed. What followed was open season on any human we deemed unworthy to live. We weren't all that different from your Batman today.
You do know he's not real, right? Rachel asked. She could think of many ways the two were different. Batman never killed people, for starters. Also, he wasn't a vampire, though he did fight Dracula in one of the cartoons.
We didn't draw the line at muggers, but began even going after organized crime. Like defeating any beast, we started with the head.
The two of them were in a lavish office, staring down a round fat man with little hair. The man was upset. That was abundantly clear with the color of his face, a deep red, like a cherry.
Are you threatening me?
The man said, growling angrily.
though he was more than a little afraid. "Why wouldn't he be? We just appeared without warning in his office, effortlessly bypassing his security."
Eckhart just chuckled. Dressed in a pristine tuxedo and black top hat.
"Threatening you would mean you'd have a chance to live if you give us what we want."
Eckhart slipped to a position behind the man's chair and leaned in close to his ear.
"It's your bad fortune, I regret to say, that all we want from you is your life."
The man screamed, "Security!" which only provoked the vampire to action. Eckhart grabbed the chubby mob boss by the jaw and ripped his head clean off his shoulders. 3 of his guards came to his rescue, too late, of course. Genevieve made short work of them with her claws.
Rah, rah, rah. Vampire claws.
I kind of forgot that was a thing. I need to do that again in the future someday. Have another vampire with cool claws.
Rah.
His guards satiated
our bloodlust for night, but by sunset the next day we were already itching for more. There were certain pubs throughout Paris that were not so secret hangouts for supporters of the crime family. We went to one of those nightclubs and found it bustling with people looking for answers behind their leader's sudden demise.
Eckhart walked into the place carrying a brown sack over his shoulder. Everyone ignored him at first, but that quickly changed as he dropped the contents of his sack on the bar, and the crime lord's head rolled down the length to stop at one man's drink. Everyone was speechless, some of their expressions priceless. If Rachel had her phone with her in this dream world, she'd have certainly taken a picture. Eckhart just growled, and his fangs extended.
"Go home,"
he said, surprising Rachel with a seeming change of heart.
"Kiss your wife and start living an honest life, or I will find you."
Maybe 5 people got up and left, but most of the patrons remained motionless, every gaze on Eckhart. No one noticed Genevieve come in the front door, 2 sabers held at the ready. Period. That needs a period after the end of a sentence. Conjunction function, what's your I screwed that up. Oh well.
More people had stayed than I could have hoped.
Eckhart looked around and chuckled.
"Good,"
he said. Many of the men in the bar, as well as a couple women, pulled pistols and leveled them. Pulled pistols and leveled them at Eckhart.
"You're probably all here for revenge,"
Eckhart said, not even a little afraid of their guns.
"But you'll stay for dessert."
In a blink of an eye, Eckhart was gone. He slipped beside each and every person in the room with a gun and disarmed them before slashing their throat. When he was done, which didn't take long at all, the vampire stood in the center of the nightclub and sort of half skipped and half danced beneath the rain of blood from all of his kills. At the door, Genevieve went to work with her sword, slashing up anyone close to her and painting the walls with their entrails. It was a horrific scene, and only then did the remaining humans still standing begin to scream.
"It was the happiest time in our relationship."
I see that, Rachel said, not quite sure how sarcastic she was being. She was in a different bar now. It was classier than the last one, with a pianist playing some classical tune. Genevieve was carrying a pint of beer through the crowd to something that looked an awful lot like a pool table. Eckhart was playing against a gentleman with greased black hair and a thin mustache. Really? Quite suddenly, I'm sorry. Who's winning? Genevieve asked, passing the gentleman as he rubbed chalk on his cue. I am, the man said. Eckhart took a shot and sunk a ball. Fell then drink up, Genevieve said, passing the man her drink. The man smiled. A man never refuses an offered beverage, he said, taking a sip as Eckhart did his second shot, but missed his mark. You remember this is for 100 francs, right? Genevieve circled the table to drape her arm casually on Eckhart's shoulder.
I've never really... Oh, that's not Eckhart, that's her. I've never really understood this game,
she admitted to the two men. The gentleman smiled. Well, that's because the noble game of billiards isn't a man's sport. Oh, is a man's... That's because the noble game of billiards is a man's sport, he said with an air of arrogance. With an air of arrogance as he leaned over the table. Don't worry, there's only 27 more pages left. That was horrifying when said out loud. He leaned over the table. Yes, with arrogance. Yes. Rachel could see that Genevieve was bristling with anger at the man's apostrophe S. Blatant sexist remark, but she was trying to keep herself in control.
We'd been having a sort of drought lately. It had been 3 days since we'd found so much as a mugger on the street. Genevieve had gone back to eating rats, but I was still hopeful something would turn up.
The gentleman took his shot, but didn't hit anything. And I took a bite of a carrot. Oh, good bite. Carrot break. Eating carrots, 'cause they're good. They're so good. Alright. Scroll, scroll, scroll. Scroll, scroll, scroll. Shake that booty. Shake that booty. The gentleman took his shot, but didn't hit anything. I see you've missed your ball there, Genevieve said mockingly. The man was unconcerned. Oh, but look where your friend has to shoot from, he told Genevieve. He can't get his ball without sinking the 8-ball. And that would be bad? Genevieve asked, oblivious. Eckhart just smiled. He didn't take time to prepare or line up his shot, but tapped it casually with his cue and sent it bouncing off 2 corners and around the 8-ball to strike his ball and curve it perfectly into the pocket. Ooh, well, that was pretty, Genevieve said, waiting to see how the man would react. He broke his cue over his knee. Oh, that's bullshit, the man said, dropping both halves of his cue on the table. Even I couldn't have made that shot.
Why, Eckhart said, towering over the man threateningly, are you supposed to be good?
The man was speechless.
I still have one more shot,
Eckhart said, taking the shot with one hand behind his back without even looking. He sunk the 8-ball.
I win.
Both men looked down at the money, but the other gentleman grabbed it first, flipping the table in the process. He ran for the door. Eckhart, obviously rather angry, grabbed one of the pool cue shards from the table and went to follow. Genevieve tried to stop him.
Don't. Her word landed on deaf ears. I'd found my next victim.
Outside there was snow on the ground, and the gentleman was trying to shepherd a woman and child onto a horse-drawn carriage. Did you get it, father? The boy asked, his voice soft. Yes, said the father. Now we can afford 3 tickets to the circus. Hooray, the boy said. It's all I've ever wanted. Oh my God, Rachel said, realizing what Eckhart was about to do. You can't kill him.
I was hungry. I would have done anything for blood.
Eckhart grabbed the man's shoulder, the broken cue still in his offhand.
We still have business,
he told the gentleman. Oh, please, the man said, begging. My child. Eckhart chuckled, looking down on the man like Ian would a bucket of chicken, KFC chicken.
You misunderstand me, sir. You can keep the money.
The man didn't understand. Then what do you want? Whatever Eckhart was going to say, he didn't get to reply before Genevieve intervened, stepping in front of the starving vampire and raising her hand to hold him back. I can't let you hurt him, Genevieve insisted firmly. I'd rather die than be complicit in the murder of an innocent man. Eckhart didn't show any sign he was comprehending a word Genevieve was saying.
Get out of my way,
he ordered. Genevieve wouldn't move. You'll have to kill me, she said. Vous avez déjà mensonge sur vos mains maintenant. Combien plus avant de vous ne pouvez pas voir le peuple. Oh my god, that was horrible. Vous avez déjà mensonge sur vos mains maintenant. Combien plus avant de vous ne pouvez pas voir le peuple. If that's what we're becoming, then you should just kill me.
What else was I to do?
Not be evil? Rachel suggested.
Fine,
Eckhart said, stabbing the pool cue deep into Genevieve's heart. Her eyes widened, and it was quite clear she hadn't expected to actually die for the man. Electricity shot out in all directions, creating a brilliant light show in the middle of the dark Paris street. The gentleman grabbed his family and pulled them back against the carriage in fear. It was like they were all frozen in horror. The electricity changed direction, shooting into Eckhart and launching him through the air into a dark alley. What did she show you? Rachel asked Eckhart.
That's personal.
That wasn't fair. Oh, come on. Needless to say,
when I awoke, I had no interest in confronting my emotions. Instead, I hid from them. Cutting myself from them, I hid behind the monster.
Water break. Do. Water break. It's not water, it's just carrot. I lied to you, I'm sorry. Finally, the gentleman seemed ready to take... No, Alright. That's something you're gonna find later. Alright. Finally, the gentleman seemed ready to take action. Oh, run, he told his wife, grabbing her head between his hands and kissing her forehead.
Yes,
Eckhart's voice said from the darkness of the alley.
Go. I'll come find you once I'm done with your husband.
Eckhart slipped from the alley and buried his deep teeth into the man's neck. Ripping the flesh, blood splattered against the side of the carriage, and the man's wife screamed.
By the time I returned to my senses, there was such a long trail of bodies behind me that I knew I had no choice but to skip town or risk being found. I left Paris and never looked back. I headed north and crossed the English Channel to make a new start. I was killing indiscriminately at this point, and I'd become quite good at it. Sometimes I would play with my food, or make the killing look like it had been done by a human. I had grown to enjoy inflicting pain. I especially loved the fear I could invoke on others.
Another water break. My apologies. That's sick, Rachel said, tired of this story. I think I've seen enough.
But you need to see the rest. You need to understand.
If you wanted me to understand, Rachel said, you should have quit while you were ahead.
It's not me. I wanted you to understand. You're in danger, Rachel, from things much worse than me. And as long as you stay with your friends, they are in danger too. I was alone for decades. Every once in a while, I would turn to someone for company, only to kill them after they would inevitably turn on me.
Hold on, Rachel said. You're really going to leave me hanging with all that danger stuff? Oh, this is supposed to be bolded and it's not. Bold.
You'll understand soon enough. Our time is short, and it's very imperative that I continue.
What did Eckhart mean by that? She thought he'd had all the time in the world. How much was he really in control?
In the early 1900s, I was a mess, living in a dump of a place, and taking all my money from the wallets of those I'd killed. I was being careful, or at least I thought I was, but still, she found me. It was the early 1900s, and I had found my next victim, a woman attending her friend's bridal shower.
Rachel found herself in a bar, surrounded by women in elegant dresses. The bar itself wasn't anything special, though there were some brightly colored streamers hanging from the ceiling, and a nice painted sign celebrating the coming marriage with a beautiful portrait of the bride and groom.
To Sir Endelberry,
the one woman said with a raise of her glass,
may he be a loving husband.
Another woman raised her glass. This one was quite likely the most beautiful of the bunch, with her fair skin and flowing blonde hair.
Here's to the honeymoon,
she said in a melodic sing-song voice.
I'll drink to that,
said the bride-to-be, raising her glass.
Here's to going home alone,
said one woman with her head in her hand and her elbow on the edge of the bar. She looked miserable, yet when the blonde woman or bride-to-be would smile at her, she'd smile back, a forced little thing.
I'll drink to that,
Eckhart told the woman from the stool beside her. She drank her drink, but his went right back onto the counter.
Though perhaps you're just too hard on yourself,
he told her, and Rachel could see his wheels in motion. Next thing she knew, they were in the alley, and Eckhart was biting down on her neck.
Help!
The woman cried, too quiet for anyone to hear, or so Rachel thought, but the beautiful blonde woman from inside stepped into the alley and grabbed Eckhart by the shoulders. She threw him off the other woman.
Leave her alone, the blonde beauty said. She's under my protection.
Eckhart bared his teeth, completely lost in the bloodlust. I probably should have said that with her accent.
Leave her alone! She's under my protection.
Eckhart bared his teeth, completely lost in the bloodlust. He was going to tear her to pieces.
Oh, please,
the woman said, frowning in such a way to show off fangs of her own.
I'm much older than you, and could quite simply tear you to pieces.
Her fangs retracted, and she took a step back.
But I'd hate to mess up my new dress. Surely we can come to some sort of alternate arrangement. You're a vampire,
Eckhart said with a modicum of surprise, his bloodlust seeming to fade as he straightened and started acting like a man once more.
Please don't state the obvious, the woman said, rolling her eyes. You'll bore me to tears with your redundancy. I'm sorry. And don't apologize, the blonde vampire said. It's unattractive in a man. She turned to her friend. Go back inside and tell the rest I won't be returning tonight, but that the party was absolutely splendid. Apostrophe. Her human friend frowned. I only came for you, the depressed woman said. Then do this for me as well, the vampire insisted. She gave Eckhart a look that looked more inquisitive than any before it. You'd best sleep in your own apartment tonight, and don't try to give me any more sad face. Her eyes darted back to her human friend. You know how much I detest sad face.
The woman started to make very droopy eyes, and then stopped with a laugh. I'm just kidding. She put her hand to her neck and shot Eckhart a resentful sneer. Try not to take in another stray. She opened the door to return to the party, covering the wound with ruffles along the neck of her dress. The blonde vampire yelled after the woman. No promises. She turned her attention back to Eckhart and gave him a stern expression. She wasn't skinny, like the movie stars of the modern day, but instead hit that perfect ratio to be stunning. Her dress showed off considerably more cleavage, but still she moved with a certain grace. My name is Victoria Santi de Paris, the vampire said, crossing her arms. Now it would be polite to give me yours. She seemed sensible to me. No kidding. Rachel was immediately enamored by the woman. She recognized the name as that of the vampire who met Tanya and Ian in Detroit, though they failed to mention how beautiful she was. Eckhart, Rachel's sire said weakly. He didn't... Oh. What? Oh, he's probably giving her his name. Because she said Victoria Santi de Paris. Eckhart, Rachel's sire said weakly. He didn't seem yet sure what to make of this woman. Do you have a place to stay, Eckhart? Victoria asked, his name rolling off her tongue, far easier than his own. No, she answered. He answered. Sorry. That was a lie, of course. I'd found sudden interest in this woman, and was desperate to learn more. Well, that simply wouldn't do, Victoria said, putting her hands on her hips. Of course, you are more than invited to stay with me. She beckoned for him to follow her, and led him out of the alley. I'm afraid it's a drab little thing. Oh, man. Alright, give me one quick second here. Sorry. I'm back. Ugh. Sorry about that. I just put on some tea because I realized my eyes were drooping. I'm like, no, I'm not going to zone out again. Instead of zoning out, I'll just give you dead air while I go to the kitchen to make some tea. So that happened. Very exciting. Alright, where was I? She asked him if he had a place to stay. He said no, even though he did, because he's interested in this woman. Well, that simply won't do, Victoria said, putting her hands on her hips. Of course, you are more than invited to stay with me. She beckoned for him to follow her, and led him out of the alley. I'm afraid it's a drab little thing. It wasn't. Her place was, in fact, absolutely wonderful. It was huge, taking up the top 2 floors of a building in downtown Paris. Her apartment had all sorts of amazing artifacts everywhere. That's a Native American peace pipe, Victoria told Eckhart, who had eyed a beautifully sculptured and colorfully painted thing that didn't look like any pipe Rachel had ever seen. It was given to me by a great leader of their people, 3 days before he was challenged to open combat by his brother and killed. Good story. Good story, Rachel said. At least Victoria's stories didn't go on forever. And were awesome.
You've been to the New World?
Eckhart asked with wonder. Only once since it was discovered, she told him with a half smile. A lot of trees, she continued, her eyes glazing over, and naked men. Her smile went from 50% to a full 100. My collection is easily dwarfed by my maker, Victoria explained to the young vampire, leading him through her home. She didn't seem interested in pointing out any of the important things like bathroom or kitchen, nor did she seem at all to care whether Eckhart was even paying attention. But he was.
You stay in touch with your sire?
Eckhart asked, a question Victoria ignored. He has the exact cannon, I kid you not, that Napoleon used to shoot the nose off the Sphinx in Egypt. Of course, a lot of people think that never happened. Victoria stopped and raised a finger to Eckhart. I wouldn't mention that in front of him. It's somewhat of a sore topic, but he loves that cannon.
You expect we'll meet?
Eckhart asked. I hope so, Victoria told him. It's not impossible. I have a reunion next month. My maker and a group of his friends get together, share war stories, and other things. Victoria started smiling again. I heard my tea's ready. Give me a sec. And some fucking brownies, 'cause damn right I want some brownies. Alright, I'm back. I told you it'd be fasting this time. I mean, I don't think I told you that, but it was. That tea is hot. But it does taste very much like an Earl Grey. That's what I do. I go up to my little whatchamacallit, food processor, and I'm like, Earl Grey, hot. And then it gives me an Earl Grey tea, hot. And then I eat one of these brownies with it. 2 bright brownies. So good. I rate these 2 bite brownies definitely 5 stars. In fact, I'd rate them higher than the carrots. The tea is more of a 4 star. It's so hot. Alright, that was rating foods presented by 99% Geek. Now back to book reading presented by 99% Geek. I need to laugh at my own jokes.
I did stay with her for a month, and for those 30 days I didn't kill a single human.
Aw, I'm so proud of you, Rachel said sarcastically.
She had a large circle of friends who all knew that she was a vampire. They openly allowed her to feed on them, knowing that if they didn't help their friend, she would die. Victoria insisted that was the best way to live as a vampire, but she had a way with them I just could never share with any human. Maybe it was because there were only 2 things that mattered for me anymore: food and love. If I didn't want to have sex with someone, they were only food to me. I wasn't about to fall in love with a human anytime soon. Anyway, my eyes were only ever on Victoria the whole time I was with her. I was infatuated by her. Unfortunately, she saw me as nothing more than a passing fad. She was trying to change me, and could see that it wasn't taking. Still, she kept me around until her reunion, possibly just so she'd have someone to show off. It was a short-lived travel to her sire's mansion, and she explained on the way that we'd be arriving a day early, before the others arrived. Her maker lived in a small port town called Southampton. You might have heard of it.
Tea break, do 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 do. Tea break. Oh, that's so good. I haven't had a tea in a while. It's been like over a year. Whew, I just got a new, whatchamacallit, Keurig machine. One of those Keurig machines with the K-cups. And I rate it 5 stars. That was another food rating presented by 99% Geek. Now back to a book reading by 99% Geek.
Unfortunately, she saw me as nothing more than a passing fad.
I don't know if I've read this part.
She was trying to change me.
Did I read this part?
And could see that it wasn't taking.
Yeah, I read this part.
Still, she kept me around until her reunion, possibly just so she'd have someone to show off. It was a short travel to her sire's mansion, and she explained on the way that we'd be arriving a day early before the others arrived. Her maker lived in a small port town called yes, Southampton. You might have heard of it.
Rachel had. It was the town the Titanic had launched from before sinking. The city looked much like it had in the James Cameron movie, bustling with activity, even with Eckhart and Victoria arriving in the middle of the night. Southampton was a city that never slept. The two vampires passed a cordoned-off alleyway surrounded by police. There seemed to be an inspector and another man in a red, wide-brimmed hat leaning over the chalk outline of a man on the ground.
"Where's the body?"
Rachel heard the man ask. The inspector looked at the man with bewilderment.
It's down in the morgue. It's down in the morgue. We weren't just gonna let it laze about here all day for you to show up.
The man with the red hat crossed his arms, not at all happy with the inspector.
It's important that I see the body untampered.
The inspector was insulted now, and angry.
I'm sorry, he said, trying to stay polite, but under what authority can you make such demands?
The ultimate authority, the man said, tipping his hat and offering the inspector some kind of letter.
From the Queen.
The inspector gave the letter back and put his hands on his hips.
Well, you'll get another one tonight, I promise you that.
Rachel didn't see or hear any more, however, as Eckhart and Victoria turned a corner. They arrived at a Victorian-style townhouse, 3 stories high, with a beautiful balcony protruding out from the top floor. Victoria stepped up to the door and rapped the bronze knocker against the polished wood. It made a reverberating thud, and mere moments later a young man answered the door. The man looked mere 15, or at most 16, and had a thin mustache that appeared more like dirt under his nose than hair. He was just in the process of lighting a smoke and smiled at Victoria. He didn't say hello or give any kind of greeting. What he did do was look at Eckhart and frown.
Another one?
He asked rhetorically, it seemed, as he stepped back to let them in.
Don't you ever get bored of people, Victoria?
Victoria stepped inside, clearly upset by his less than warm welcome.
And put all my love in things, she said with disdain. Never.
Eckhart!
Eckhart,
the vampire called, raising an arm to her maker.
This is Matthias.
Stop listening, you stupid Xbox. The old vampire in a young boy's body took a long drag of his smoke and corrected her.
I go by Matthew now. You really do like that cannon,
Eckhart remarked, seeing it in the very center of Matthew's front hall.
Yes,
Matthew said, happy Eckhart had asked. He shuffled over to the large metal weapon.
I keep it polished and armed, you know. If anyone unwelcome shows up at my door.
He put his cigarette close to the fuse and laughed.
Boom!
Victoria didn't seem to find her sire very funny.
We saw a detective talking to a man on the way here, she told Matthew sternly. You've grown sloppy. How long will it be until they get on your trail?
Matthew laughed again. Taking another long drag of his smoke.
A long time, he assured Victoria. I'm on the city council, he explained,
stepping back and brandishing his arm dramatically.
"And I've made it my mission to personally lead the investigation and catch our city's monstrous serial killer."
The eldest vampire winced.
"There's just been so many dead ends."
Victoria crossed her arms. "Well, your detective was talking to someone new. A man with a red hat."
"She worries all the time,"
Matthew said to Eckhart, pointing at her comically.
"I heard they were sending a representative from London. If he turns out to be any trouble, I'll deal with it."
"How?" Eckhart asked with interest. Where's my mouse? There's my mouse. Brownie break. Do 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 do. Brownie break. Oh. Amazing. The best.
"She worries all the time."
Oh, yes.
"I'm going to deal with a representative from London. If he turns out to be any trouble, I'll deal with it."
Tea.
"How?"
Eckhart asked with interest. Matthew shrugged.
"I was going to kill him."
He changed the topic.
"Have you eaten?"
he asked Eckhart.
"No." "Well, then, I know just the person,"
Matthew said, clapping his hands together and putting an arm around Eckhart's shoulder.
"Have you ever had Chinese?" "We didn't return until very early that morning, getting in just before the sun rose."
Matthew came in first, laughing as Eckhart closed the door behind them.
"That was cutting it a little close,"
Eckhart said while shaking off a burn on his hand. Matthew dismissed the other vampire's concerns, lighting a cigarette.
Didn't Victoria tell you? I always cut it a little close."
He thought for a second.
"Or a lot close."
Matthew offered Eckhart a cigarette with his matchbook, and Rachel's sire accepted both.
"Now, where is Victoria, anyway?"
Matthew asked.
"I've got a morning wood I think she'd be happy to take care of."
Eckhart stopped trying to light his smoke, the match burning between his fingers.
"What?"
he asked in surprise. Tea break. Do 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 do. So good.
"Oh, did you want to sleep with her?"
Matthew asked his new friend.
"Well, I can happily give her a go once I'm done. Well, oh, did you want to sleep with her? Well, you can happily give her a go once I'm done."
The older vampire smiled.
"I promise I won't be too long."
Boop.
"That's disgusting,"
Eckhart said, and Rachel could tell he was upset. In fact, she wondered where his disembodied voice had gone. He seemed to stop talking whenever the really good parts happened.
"Victoria won't mind."
Sorry, that almost sounded like Eckhart there.
"Victoria won't mind,"
Matthew said, getting closer to Eckhart and leaning on the mouth of his cannon.
"I remember one night, years, centuries ago, we were off fighting some war or another when the subject of your affection was feeling particularly frisky. She let the entire army have their way with her that night."
Eckhart put his hand against the cannon to steady himself.
"Shut up,"
he said quietly. Excuse me. That was a tea burp.
"Don't believe me,"
Matthew said.
"It was beside a large bonfire. Everyone surrounded, chanting and singing. It was a big old party with Victoria right there in the center on all fours. There were too many men for everyone to have their fill. I'm talking like 100,000 men. So I just stood back and watched. Maybe slapped my monkey around a bit, if you know what I mean."
Eckhart didn't seem able to take any more.
Shut up!
He screamed, roaring with his fangs drawn. He dropped the match on the fuse of the cannon and it went off with a loud bang, taking Matthew clear in the chest. Okay. Sure, why not? He was thrown across the hall and straight through the wooden door into the burning sunlight. Eckhart went to the door, but there was nothing he could do. Matthew continued to barrel across the street into a blacksmith's shop. The whole roof collapsed around him, and he landed with a leg in the furnace. The fire quickly caught and spread, quickened by his exposure to the sun. He tried to get up, but the wound in his chest was more than a little devastating. Rachel didn't think most Matthew's internal organs were anywhere close to intact anymore. Still, as the fire spread, adrenaline must have brought Matthew to his feet. He made a desperate run for a barrel of water in hopes of extinguishing himself. The blacksmith had his arms stuck in the rubble and was only just managing to free it when he saw Matthew and shouted a warning. "That's not water!" he yelled. "It's gasoline!" The explosion must have been heard throughout the city, and all the glass in Matthew's townhouse shattered in the shockwave. As the dust settled, the picture was grim, with extreme structural damage and a spreading fire that was threatening to rage completely uncontrolled. Eckhart seemed as surprised as Rachel and everyone on the street. "Oops," he said quietly, looking around, likely searching for an escape. He didn't have time. There was a roar, and it was quite clear that Victoria knew. She flew down the stairs and grabbed Eckhart before he could even speak or slip away, throwing him through a wall into the library. He got up and tried to step away, but Victoria just kept striking at him. Every line of her fist resounded through the building like thunder.
"Wait,"
Eckhart said, trying to speak.
"It was an accident."
Victoria ignored his pleas.
I'll kill you,"
she roared,
"Roar!"
dragging him to the ground and climbing on top of him. The female vampire grabbed Eckhart by the top of his jaw and seemed to be trying to rip his head off with her bare hands. He struggled and cried out, but didn't seem capable of resisting. Whether or not Victoria could have actually done it, Rachel would never know. The angry vampire was interrupted by the red-hatted man from earlier. He must have heard them fighting, or perhaps even saw the explosion that originated from there. Either way, he seemed quite prepared for what he saw in that library, as he pulled out a crossbow and shot for Victoria's heart. Eckhart saw the man as well and tried to warn Victoria, but couldn't for obvious reasons, because her hands were all over his face, jaw, and neck and stuff. The bolt thudded into her back, missing her heart, but hurting her more than a little. The female vampire got off Eckhart and reached behind her to pull the bolt out, wailing still more from sorrow than pain. Eckhart was free now, but needed a moment to massage his jaw back into place. Ew. A moment he didn't have, as the vampire with the hat dropped his crossbow and pulled out two smaller ones, firing them both at Eckhart's chest. Eckhart slipped to his feet, dodging both bolts easily. "Who the hell is this guy?" Rachel asked, but still there was no response from the disembodied voice of Eckhart. The man dropped his second and third crossbow, only to pull out a fourth and fifth. He fired off those two, but still couldn't land a hit on Eckhart or Victoria. Eckhart slipped in at the man, looking to feed, and the man pulled a wooden stake from somewhere on his belt. Victoria got between Eckhart and the man before he could feed. She scratched Eckhart across the face and turned to catch the other man's hand before he could plunge his stake into her back. Breaking his hand with a squeeze, she took his stake and turned it on Eckhart. She went straight for his heart, but this time Eckhart was ready to defend himself. Deflecting her attack with his hand and forcing it over his shoulder, he got his leg between them and kicked her away from him, only for the man with the red hat to cut back in. He was holding his sword in his broken hand now, and a stake in his other. The man just didn't know when to quit. He swung with all his might behind his sword, and Eckhart blocked with his arm, slapping the blade away. Just as fast, the man attacked with his stake, and Eckhart slapped that hand away too. It became like a dance, one the man interrupted with a swift kick. Eckhart was able to block that attack too, but it left his gut open to a gashing blow. Eckhart took the man's blade in his side, grunting and only just catching the man's stake before it pierced his heart.
"Who are you?"
Eckhart asked, holding back the man's weight. The man was determined and confident. He didn't seem to have much regard for his own well-being, far more interested in causing as much damage as possible. And I am having another brownie. I apologize. in advance. Right, Eckhart just asked, "Who are you?" The man was determined and confident. He didn't seem to have much regard for his own well-being, far more interested in causing as much damage as possible. "There is a score more, just like me on the way," he told Eckhart before Victoria stepped back into the fight. The woman grabbed the man so hard by the shoulder that her fingers stabbed into his flesh, drawing blood. He screamed as she flipped him across the room, crashing into a bookshelf where he came to an unconscious slump on the floor. Tea break, do, tea break. Eckhart struck fast before Victoria could be ready for him. He hit her with both palms to her stomach. She was thrown out of the library to crash into the stairs in the front hall. Eckhart took his moment of quiet to feed on their unconscious attacker. Rachel looked back at the stairs and was surprised to see that Victoria had disappeared. Eckhart noticed soon as well, dropping the man before he could finish feeding. There was a noise from outside, and Eckhart had to slip away as two other men with red hats came into the building and immediately spotted their comrade. "Sir," one of them said, leaning down beside their superior and slapping him across the face. Eckhart's attacker woke up, his gloved hand going to his neck as his face betrayed his pain.
"This place is infested with vampires," he said in a rough voice. "We're going to have to burn it to the ground." "Luckily, I managed to escape. I found a cloak on the upper floor and fled across the rooftops of the port where I boarded a ship to America. It was actually aboard that ship that I learned how to manipulate the minds of humans, a talent that was in fact quite useful for avoiding suspicion."
"Hey," Rachel said, not going to let the matter drop this time. "Where'd you go for like 5 pages of your autobiography?"
"I apologize. It was a powerful moment, especially for me."
That wasn't it. There was something Eckhart was hiding. He didn't seem the same. As a matter of fact, his voice seemed weaker, further away. She had so far just accepted everything he had told her, including that he was in complete control. What if that wasn't true? And if he wasn't in control, who was? Rachel? She tried to think about her parents, wanting to see them again more than anyone, and quite suddenly they were no longer in England during the early 1900s. They were in her kitchen, where her mom was cooking up a delicious breakfast for her dad and little Jacob. Even Ian was there, laughing about something geeky from his spot at their table. So it was true. She'd had the power all along. Eckhart was just holding on for the ride, and his grip it seemed, was starting to loosen.
"You have to listen to me. You have to understand. You're in danger. The Red Hats will find you. And as long as you stay with your friends, you're putting them in danger too."
"No, you don't understand," Rachel yelled, the kitchen scene dissolving around her into pure blackness. "I want you out of my head," she yelled at the nothing. Most of all, though, she wanted to wake up. Scene change. Scene change. Scene change. "You can't go you can't go in there. You can't go in there."
"But Rachel's in there."
Ian's voice rang out. Rachel could hear him, even though she still hadn't figured out yet how to move or even open her eyes. "The church is collapsing," Tanya's voice argued. Rachel could hear the school president struggle to hold Ian back.
"Yeah, and she's still inside,"
Ian argued, back, getting free of Tanya and rushing into the church. "But she's a vampire," Tanya said, though it was too late. "Better her than you." Rachel forced her eyes open and was surprised to see a raging fire quickly spreading towards her. She slipped to her feet and slipped to the center of the church, avoiding the fire. The broken pews were starting to catch as well, but worse than that, it had spread to the few remaining support beams. The whole building was coming apart. Rachel pulled out her iPhone and was discouraged to see that the glass had cracked in her fight. So much for being unbreakable. It still turned on, luckily, and Rachel was surprised by the time to see that she'd been out for mere minutes, far less than it had seemed to her.
"Rachel,
Ian called, spotting her in the center of the church. Rachel slipped to him, pushing him aside as a piece of debris fell from above. "What the hell are you doing here?" Rachel asked him over the roar of the fire. Ian coughed. "I couldn't just let you die in here." Rachel's jaw dropped, looking at him with complete bewilderment. His coughing was getting worse. "Come on," Rachel said, grabbing Ian and stepping out of the church. "Holy crap!" Ian said as they came to stop beside Ian. Yes, Ian became beside himself. Ian said as they came to stop beside Tanya, waiting anxiously outside the church. "What a ride!" "Oh, thank God," Tanya said, spotting the two of them. She tried to hug Rachel, but Rachel just grabbed her arm. "Come on," Rachel said, stepping them both across the street to where the rest of their friends were waiting. "Wow," Tanya said, looking to where she'd just been a second ago. "Crap." Ian smiled. "That's what I said." Rachel hugged them. "I'm so sorry you got dragged into my shit," she whispered to him, squeezing him as tightly as she could without hurting him. He seemed weak on his feet, and she could smell his fresh blood where she'd bit him. Ian wasn't mad. Rachel couldn't figure out why, but he wasn't. "I'm sorry he used me against you," Ian apologized. "What gall!" Rachel released him and pushed him away. "Shut up," she told him. "It's my job to protect you." Ian shook his head. "It's our job to protect each other," he refuted. "That's what friends are for." Rachel couldn't react because at that moment someone else called her name. Her dad. He was bruised and dirty, his white collar shirt hanging loosely from him with one sleeve torn and the other rolled back. She'd never seen him so ruffled. "You probably have a lot of questions," she said quietly. He hugged her, and in his arms Rachel suddenly felt like his little girl again. His touch reminded her of being human, but the moment was fleeting. I just have one," he whispered in her ear. "Are you all right?" She let go of him and tried to say yes, but what came out was, "No." How could she tell them that his little girl had turned into a monster? "Well, we'll work it out," he told her, hugging her again. There was an enormous clatter as the bell tower collapsed into the rest of the structure. Mike Jones cheered from where he was seated beside the cockpit of Jason's crane. "We have to stop destroying so many buildings," Rachel yelled up to him, but Mike just laughed. "I vote we destroy a few more," he said, cracking a beer in celebration. "Why not celebrate?" Andrew asked, offering a high five to anyone who wanted to take it. "We're expert vampire hunters." Rachel stared him down and quickly corrected himself. Rachel is an expert vampire hunter, and Roll her trusty sidekick. Rachel still crossed her arms. Everyone didn't seem to get how much danger she'd put them in. Any one of them could have died that night. Tanya stepped forward. "Well, if nobody wants it, I'll take that high five." She slapped her hand hard against Andrew's. "I took out a toddler vamp tonight," she boasted lightly to the gang. "That's what I'm talking about," Andrew said with a cheer. "2 in one night." Bilal butted in, his face pale enough to look white. "Aha! Sorry to be a buzzkill here," he told them, watching Mike drink with disdain, "but won't the authorities be here any second now?" Jason climbed out from the crane's controls to voice his agreement. I need to be long gone with this thing by then if I don't want to be implicated," he said in his deep voice. "Go," Rachel told him, "and thank you for your help." She meant it. She couldn't have stopped Eckhart without everyone's efforts. Jason just shrugged. In the army, everyone has to learn to work as a team," he said. "Each member of the team is expected to utilize his strengths not for personal gain, but for the betterment of the unit." We're not in an army," Rachel said, annoyed at everyone's willingness to risk themselves for her. Maybe Eckhart was right. Maybe she really was a danger to everyone. Now that is the end of the chapter, but the epilogue is only like 2 pages, maybe 3, maybe 5, apparently. So we're just going to read that quickly, and then A Suburban Fantasy will be over. So epilogue: all the need-to-know facts about vampires. By the time Ian got home that night, it was already past 4. Tanya had led them all through the back trails where they were less likely to get spotted. Bilal split from the group first, calling his mother for a pickup. Ian's house was their next stop from there. Ian felt exhausted and sore. He was glad to find his mother asleep on the counter, and tried not to wake her as he stumbled his way up his stairs and into his room. It took all his strength just to get his clothes off, and he slumped onto the bed quite content to go to sleep naked. His hand slipped into his pants pocket, and he placed his phone on the charger. 4:36, it said. Ian was going to sleep until 2 at least. Nothing was going to get him up from bed before then. His phone rang, blaring the Pokemon theme loud enough to quite likely wake his mother. Ba ba ba, gotta catch 'em all, Pokemon! Ian grabbed the phone in a panic, hitting talk and listening to make sure his mother was still sleeping. With a snore from downstairs, he raised the phone to his ear. What? Ian asked, whispering angrily into his phone. And more importantly, why? Why call it 4:36? Oh, that's in his head. Why call it 4:36 in the morning? Get dressed and meet me at the school, Tanya's voice said loudly. It sounded like she was close to panicking. Are you serious? Ian asked, defeated. That was basically the last thing in the world he wanted to do right then. It's DEFCON black or whatever you dweebs say. Scene change. Scene change. Scene change. Ian met Tanya in the parking lot and practically jumped off his bike, letting it clatter to the concrete when he saw Rachel standing on the roof of the school. She was standing right at the very edge, quietly watching Ian come in. She said she was going in to grab something from her locker, Tanya told Ian once he was close enough. Ian looked from Rachel to Tanya. What happened to her clothes? He asked. Sure enough, she was naked except for her underwear and bra. And there's that, Tanya said. Where's her dad? Ian asked, searching the empty parking lot with his gaze. Rachel sent him ahead, Tanya told Ian. Andrew was trying to fill him in on all the need-to-know facts about vampires. Ian stopped moving and raised his arm to slow Tanya down. Wait, he said. Her father is alone with Andrew? I know, Tanya said. Ian didn't have to go on. I just figured this crisis was a little more serious. Of course, Ian said, starting off again, this time straight for the front door. Have you tried talking to her? Tanya shook her head. I just thought, well, you're her best friend, right? Ian took one last look up before going inside. Right. Rachel! He called her name in the hallway as he made his way up the stairs to the second floor. He called it again and again. Finding the stairs to the roof, he climbed them as fast as he could, yelling out her name one final time before stopping to gasp for breath. I heard you the first time, Rachel said softly from her spot at the edge of the roof. Rachel looked beautiful, her pale white body almost glittering from the street lamps below. Not really glittering, that would be stupid, but the way her hair flew in the breeze, the way she looked, was enough to make Ian's heart melt. I don't think you'd die from that height, Ian said, reaching the edge and looking down. We've tried it before, remember? Rachel rolled her eyes. She was so cute when she did that. More cute when doing it without clothes on. The sun will be up soon, she told Ian, which was about what Ian had already suspected himself. He reached out to grab her hand, steadying them both at the edge. He really didn't want to fall off. So you're not taking off your underwear? Rachel rolled her eyes. I'm not showing you my boobs. Ian snapped his fingers in mock disappointment. But when the sun comes up, he said, nothing but your unmentionables will remain. The police officer will zip open the body bag and there'll be nothing there but a vagina and a couple boobies. And then the cop is going to ask your parents, is this your daughter? And how do you think they'll feel then? Rachel laughed. Stop, she said. I have to do this. Eckhart said it was a danger to everyone I love. He was also a crazy homicidal vampire, Ian reminded Rachel. He was right, Rachel said. Screw that, Ian said, pulling Rachel from the roof. Her skin was soft under his hand as she let him lead her by her arm to a safer spot. Rachel, he said, I would happily face any danger for you. I'd happily give my life for you because you mean everything to me. I don't want you to die because of me, Rachel argued. It's not your choice to make. It's my life, Ian said, laughing. Listen to me. You're the first thing I think about almost every morning when I wake up.
The first thing and the last thing I think about when I go to bed.
Almost every morning? Rachel asked, shifting her weight uncomfortably.
Saturday morning cartoons, Ian admitted. Come on, have you seen Young Justice?
It's funny, I wrote that forever ago, and it just came back for the third season. That line was probably written like so long ago. I'm like, I cannot believe, and now we're just hit season 3 because it got canceled for like 5 years or something. Insane. Anyway, Rachel laughed again, clearly despite herself. I said stop, she told Ian. I don't want to laugh. Ian ignored her and kept talking. He was getting through, wasn't he? I don't want to live my life if you're not in it, he told her. It wouldn't be worth it. I'd rather be dead, Rachel. I love you. He kissed her, pressing his lips hungrily against hers, and to his surprise she kissed him back. She'd always seemed not interested, but suddenly was that no longer the case? Did she want him or didn't she? They finally separated, and she looked up at him with eyes that would be full of tears if vampires could cry. I love you too, she said, grabbing his hand again and squeezing it this time. But I'm all screwed up, she told him, making a motion with her arms, offering up what she was doing on the roof as proof. I'm a freak. I'm always afraid. What I'm not is girlfriend material. She embraced him quite suddenly. Just don't give up on me, she begged. Ian shook his head. I'll always be your friend, he promised. Now, can you put some clothes on? He asked. You're making me feel chilly up here. Rachel laughed again and threw on her jeans. She only just had her hoodie back in place when Tanya joined them on the roof. Is everything okay up here? Tanya asked, climbing the stairs to the roof. Yeah, Ian assured her. Rachel has her clothes on again. Tanya joined them and gave Rachel a big hug. I'm glad you aren't going to kill yourself, she told Rachel. Rachel beckoned for Ian to join them, and the three shared a long embrace. Finally, Rachel squirmed between them, and they gave her a little room. I just remembered my iPhone broke, Rachel said, pulling the hoodie back over her head. Oh, I don't want to live anymore. No! Both Ian and Tanya cried, trying to keep Rachel in her clothes. The 16-year-old vampire laughed and stopped struggling. You're the best friends anyone could have, she told both of them, pulling her hood over her head as the sun began to peek over the horizon. Both Ian and Tanya grabbed one of Rachel's hands, and the three of them stood, the two humans watching the sun rise with colors of brilliant red and yellow. Describe it to me? Rachel asked. It's beautiful, Ian told her, trying hard to come up with something more descriptive. It's like the scene at the end of a movie, he said at last, when everyone walks into the horizon. Tanya slapped her forehead. That reminds me, she said, leaning over Rachel and punching Ian in the face. Ian collapsed to the ground, his nose awash with pain. Tanya! Rachel exclaimed, shocked at the school president's sudden attack. That was completely uncalled for. No, Ian said, touching his nose and dismayed to find he couldn't feel his own fingers against the skin. I deserved it. For kissing me? Tanya turned to Rachel in shock and anger. He kissed you? And that was the end of the book. The end. That was A Suburban Fantasy. I hope you enjoyed the book. I know it is a little spotty at points, and the spottier chapters also had spottier audio, as I wasn't quite used to recording these. There isn't about the author. Let's read the about the author. That'll be fun. Andrew Gatesy was born August 15th, 1988. That's me. And currently resides in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. He works a grueling night shift to fund his writing during the day. If you're interested in more works from him, follow him on Twitter at Andrew Gatesy. That's G as in George, E-C-Z-Y. I'm sure you know how to spell Andrew. Or visit his site at www.99geek.ca. Subscribe for $1 a month to receive every chapter of my future novels as I write them, as well as access to my entire back catalog. Go to www.patreon.com/99geek. And that is the end. Awesome. So, you're probably wondering what happens now. You're probably not, because I've been talking about it forever, and I'm sure if you've been following me, you've probably checked out my site and realized there's other stories. But yes, there are other stories. It's not just about a suburban fantasy. That was the first book I ever tried to write. Not actually true. I wrote a sci-fi book first, and it was worse than this. And I wrote that, I think, maybe still in high school. I know my grandma actually preferred it to this book, but then I went back to check it out, see if it was worth fixing up, and it was just like, no, it's a piece of crap, piece of junk. Um, so this was a suburban fantasy. Rachel Lin Smith will return. Has already, in fact, returned for 7 chapters and another like 300 pages. And that's all on my Patreon right now. So if you wanted to go to Patreon, you could check it out. On top of that, there are other stories. There is the Aldon Chronicles, a story about a fallen angel trying to prevent the end of the world. He teams up with a girl named Frankie, who is a thief who was betrayed by her guild. And together they cause all kinds of mayhem and fun. And she's just lots of fun. And there's also Adrift Homeless, the story about a dying world and the people on it trying to find a new home. And that's probably, in my opinion, my best story. And then that's Act 1 of Season 1 of 99% Geek. Contains all those shows. And I like every month I go back and forth. I write a chapter a month, and then one chapter will be urban fantasy, and the next chapter will be Adrift Homeless, and the next chapter will be Aldon Chronicles. And starting in Act 2, which we are already about halfway through Act 2, I added 2 more stories to the list. One is going to be a 5-chapter short story about a journalist in Iraq trying to cover all the chaos there. And then the other story is, they're both spin-offs of urban fantasy. The other story is a direct spin-off of urban fantasy called Dakota Slade, about a paranormal detective who is lovelorn and finds out that people are spontaneously combusting in her city and has to try and investigate why. So that's 5 stories available on patreon.com/99geek that are better than the story you've been listening to here forever, and are definitely worth checking out. What time is it now? It is, wow, it's almost time for me to go to work. Cool. So that'll be coming out soon. I'll be releasing chapters every once in a while. One key thing to remember is that I will never have a consistent schedule. I mean, I do have a consistent schedule with my writing. I promise that if you were to subscribe for $1, chapter comes out every month like clockwork. Always by the end of the month, bam, chapter. I mean, this month technically it was February 1st in some time zones, but at least in one time zone it was still January when I released my last chapter. So I did technically still make it, and I try to keep to that clockwork. Hopefully the chapter of this month is going to be Valentine's Day themed. I'm going to try to release it early. Try being the key word here. I'm going to be working on that for the next weekend and maybe the weekend after that, which means if I don't finish it this weekend, then I'm not making it for Valentine's Day. But maybe I can make it for Valentine's Day weekend or something like that. So that'll be fun to check out. I have started offering my chapters for free. If you go to 99geek.ca, there is a link to my blog, and on my blog I have a daily a geekly blog where I talk about the shows I've been watching and things like that. But also I've been releasing chapters there just because I only have 2 subscribers and I'm desperate for readers. So I'm doing anything I can at this point. I want fans. I want people to fall in love with my characters and want to know more and to be enthused and to be impatiently waiting each month for the new chapter and then maybe audience first, then maybe the money can come. In the meantime, I'll keep working my night shift, and maybe one day when the money comes, I'll be able to write more than 1 chapter a month. I mean, it takes a lot of work just to keep this going, as it is. So yeah, there's all that stuff going on.
which is pretty cool. So the thing I wanted to warn you is that because my life is so crazy and intense, that these chapters, these podcasts won't always be consistent. And I apologize for that. There's not, I know that I've read that like to have a successful podcast, you have to always be consistent with the release schedule of your podcast, and I'm not doing that at all, and I apologize, and it's horrible, and I understand why I'm probably losing audience left and right who probably would have been really interested in this if I did it better and had music at the beginning and things like that. I can play guitar. I was thinking when I start season 1 of 99% Geek here, that I might try new things, like just how I improve throughout the course of doing this first book. I will also improve throughout the course of the other books. I will try to bring some kind of musical interlude to at least play us in and out or something like that. And I will try to keep improving and getting better. So I mean, if you're following me and if you're supporting me despite how crappy I might be right now, I really appreciate it, and hopefully we can grow together and really make 99% Geek something that can sustain me, because I am very unsustained. So yeah, and all I'm asking for is support. Is your support and your follow, and anything more than that, and the money can come later. Right now it's about audience. So yeah. So please forgive me that I will never have a consistent timeline. I will try to release more than once a month, but if I keep doing that, I will eventually catch up with the Patreon, and at that point, I will only be able to release once a month, obviously, unless I do repeats of chapters, which I might need to, because my podcast host is running out of storage for me, and I don't want to pay insane amounts more for very small amounts more storage. So I think instead I'll just start deleting older episodes and maybe just have a rotating archive for people to, and then repeat things. Maybe I could do it weekly where I can just put up old ones, and then like once a month have a new one. So you'd get like 3 repeats of old ones and then 1 new one, or whatever, something like that maybe, just to keep things rolling. So I'm thinking about something like that. Maybe that would be consistent, and people would be happy. I don't know. So I mean, if you ever want to say anything to me, follow me on Twitter, send me a message, or you could email me. My email, I'm sure, is somewhere on my website, 99geek.ca. There are so many ways to contact me. Just pick one. Comment on my blog. Do anything you want. I will comment on YouTube. I will always respond. I love criticism. I love when people get excited about my characters or enthused. I love when people just talk about my writing. Like just talk about your favorite joke or something. Just send me a message and be like, I laughed so hard at this part, or I really hate this character so much. Like, be critical. I just like talking about my writing, and I like when other people talk about my writing, even when it's critical. So yeah, anyway, if I'm not going to get a cigarette before going to work unless I leave now. So this will be this, and that'll be that, and I will be back soon. The next book, I think I'm going to start with the Aldon Chronicles, because that's what I'm writing this month. So it'll be nice to read that. And that will probably be out surprisingly fast, because I have to write that very, very, start it tomorrow. So as I said, very inconsistent. I release in bursts and then disappear. But if I ever catch up, things will probably even out and be even more stringent. So yeah, peace out. Till next time, live long and prosper. May the force be with you. Those are all copyrighted. I'm going to hell.